Greetings from the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky in television. I'm Allison Lips. Adam Nedeff, author, game show historian, and researcher for the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play, is joining us. He just released the second edition of his book, Quizmaster, The Life and Times and Fun and Games of Bill Cullen. Hi, Adam.
Hi, thank you very much for getting all that out. It's a lot, but I'm at this point in my life happily where I can't settle on one thing to plug. So you were very, very patient to get all that in
Well, I want people to know about your book, especially, I don't know if it's been resolved, but you were having some trouble with Facebook getting it out
there.
there.
Yeah, Facebook. I hope everyone is sitting down for this. Facebook decided to be weird with their policies. And all of a sudden just kind of decided, well, we're not going to let you advertise the book. And the reason that there was clearly not a human being involved anywhere along this process, but whatever automation they had said I couldn't advertise my book, and they said the reason is you can't use an image of a celebrity for your product, which makes sense, except the image that I was using was the cover of the book that I've written about the life of a celebrity. So I kept trying to explain this, and Facebook said not only would not run the ad, but I've been barred from advertising on Facebook.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yes. They're punishing me for using my book cover.
You just cut out. Are you back?
Yes, I'm back. All right.
Okay. So Facebook is punishing you for using your book cover because apparently all the kids are using Bill Cullen images these days. And you're also affiliated with the official Bill Cullen website.
Well, as official as it gets, it's really...
well, I mean, fans.
It's official in the sense that Bill's family is aware of it and is fine with it.
Okay.
But it was Matt Ottinger, who was the original Bill Cullen historian, sort of let me latch onto his elbow. And about 12 years ago, I began writing this book about Bill. And Matt was incredibly accommodating, incredibly helpful, incredibly kind towards me, generous beyond words. And so I'm just very, very grateful to have him in my life and to have him involved in my project. He's really a friend and a mentor to me.
That is fantastic. And this is the second edition, which just came out a few months ago. When did the first edition come out?
First edition came out, if I'm remembering correctly, it was 2013 question mark. But
okay, so it's been a while. It was time to update it.
A minute, and especially, and this is the point that I'm trying to make, is to the people who have already bought my books. If you're rolling your eyes thinking, "Oh man, are you going to try to foist another copy of every version of every one of the books?" And I'm honestly not planning on that. I've written. I'm satisfied with what I've written in the other books that I've written. Gene Rayburn's story was very well told. Alan Mudd's story was. Dennis James' story was very well told, as much as they could be. The strange thing about Bill is, as the years have gone by, more video and more audio of him has been unearthed. Matt and I keep finding things on eBay involving him that we didn't know about, that we didn't have access to.
Oh, that's cool.
And more people, we've been able to make more contact with people that knew Bill. And so that's been kind of a blessing. And because we have access to so much more information than we had when the book was first written, it did kind of reach a point where I was looking at the first edition of Bill's book and I was thinking to myself, I'd like another crack at that.
Got it.
It get to a point where it was starting to bother me, and it was bothering me in a way that I wasn't bothered by the other books.
Okay. So if someone already has the first edition and they buy the second edition, it's going to be different enough where they're not like, oh, the same book.
Yeah. For new photos, we've got new interviews in there. I had a chance to talk to Bob Hilton, the announcer for Blockbusters.
That's cool.
I had a chance to talk to more of the staff of the $25,000 Pyramid and Bob Stewart Productions in general. and had a chance to talk to Steve Ryan, who was kind of the staff historian at Goodson Todman Productions and the creator of Blockbusters, and he had some good stories to share. So yeah, I got a chance to talk to some new people. And like I said, there's new research. There's been new things that I've discovered, and Bill's nephew David Nars is kind of the hero of the new version of this one. David
Okay.
not only did the interview, but David is his family historian. Now, for anyone whose mind kind of chimed when they heard the name there, David Nars is basically everybody in David's family goes on to become a legendary game.
Yes. We got
David's
Jack
father,
Nars.
his one of his uncles was Bill Cullen, and his other uncle was Tom Kennedy.
Yes.
So three of the greatest game show hosts of all time are all in David's family tree. And David is, from what I can gather, basically the family historian. Every family has one, and David is his.
Yes.
And he saved a lot of stuff from his family, including a box of letters that Bill saved for many years. And then after Bill died, his wife Ann saved it for many years. And then David ended up with it. So it's a box of letters that creates a pretty thorough portrait of Bill privately, personally, the way that he interacted with other people, and other people sharing their thoughts with him. There was a very moving stack of letters. On Bill's last birthday of his life, they knew that Bill was dying by the time he got to his 70th birthday.
Oh
And
wow.
so Bill's wife reached out to all their friends and said, "Can you just write Bill a letter? Just write him a letter." And so in the final weeks, final months of Bill's life, everybody that he ever knew just wrote a long, thorough letter detailing all these memories that they had with him. And some of them are very, very funny, and some of them are very, very quirky and strange. Jack Nars' ex-wife sent him a
Mm-hmm.
letter, and she had this memory of going on a vacation with Jack and Ann and Bill, and they were very, very inebriated, and they were up into the night. And Bill at one point realizes that Saturday night has technically crossed over to Sunday morning, and when he realizes it's Sunday morning, he goes around to the back of the bar where they're all drinking in the hotel, and Bill, from memory, recites a Latin mass. Uh, just He's like, "Oh, it's Sunday morning. We need to go to church." And staggers behind this bar and just starts doing a Latin mass
While
uh,
drunk.
while drunk. Yeah, uh, so that was her memory. Um, Mark Goodson. There was a letter in the box from Mark Goodson. And it's interesting. There were multiple letters from Mark Goodson, and every piece of correspondence that Mark Goodson ever wrote in his life to Bill mentions, "Oh, by the way, I discovered you." He always wanted to make a point to hammer that home whenever he wrote a note to Bill. And one of them
Okay.
is one of them is a really touching letter he wrote to Bill in 1970, and there's enough information in the letter that you can suss out the background of the letter. What you can glean from it is Mark Goodson overheard Bill say something at a To Tell the Truth taping about how his career was dead. And so
Mm-hmm.
Mark Goodson just kind of took it upon himself to write a letter to Bill saying, "You've still got it. You're still a good MC. Another show is on the way. You're still going to be a star. You're still worth something in this business." And I was really kind of touched and kind of taken aback that Mark Goodson took the time to sit down and write this, and that Bill had voiced enough of an insecurity, because Bill was always a very confident person,
Yes.
outgoing and very self-assured, and just hearing Bill express an insecurity that the boss decided, I need to take action, write him a letter, and take care of this. There was something that really stuck to me about that. So I was very grateful to David for sharing those treasures with me.
I'm grateful that you're sharing them with us.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I've been wa- um going through the Bill Cullen website because unfortunately I haven't had time to read the book. It's the end of the semester for me, and
And the thing is, I also have to take
yeah.
some blame for that, because you suggested that I assemble like a highlight reel of Bill and some video to recommend, and I've been busy enough with my own work. I never,
Well,
sorry. Yeah.
it's okay. I grew up watching Game Show Network, so I am very familiar with I've Got a Secret, the original Price is Right, which of course was hosted by Bill. Child's Play was every, I believe, Saturday morning on Game Show Network.
Mhm.
Tattletales, he appeared on with Anne. Of course, Match Game. Seems like everyone made an appearance on Match Game if they were part of the Mark Goodson, Bill Todman family.
Being on Match Game was also that was part of a clever little scheme on Bill's part because he was appearing as a panelist on Match Game, which taped at Television City in Hollywood, and
Yes.
Bill was still living in New York at the time. And one of the very shrewd things that Bill did over the years was about once or twice a year he would schedule a vacation in Los Angeles or in Palm Springs, and he would just go out there with Ann, and they would stay in that area, like Beverly Hills or wherever, for about 3 weeks. But Bill would schedule some guest appearances on game shows while he was out there. So he'd be on the panel of Password and the panel of Match Game
Okay.
and the panel of Sweepstakes. And the whole point of that was because Bill is a television performer, being on the panel of game shows during his vacation now makes it a business expense. So it was his way of writing off. It was his way to write off the hotel and his way to write off the airfare as business expenses when he paid his taxes.
That is brilliant. That is fantastic.
Man.
So I guess he would do Match Game and Tattletales if Tattletales was on. Tattletales is we're not talking about it, but it's a very weird show to me where it wasn't on very long, but it was on twice.
Well, it had two solid runs. It was 74 to 78 and then 82 to 84. But just the structure of the show was almost unique. Goodson Todman tried to do this with another show later on, but for anyone who's never seen it... Well,
there was also He Said, She Said previously.
Yeah. Every time Tattletales gets rebooted, they change the name. It started out in 1966 as a pilot called It Had to Be You. When they got it on the air, it was called He Said, She Said. He Said, She Said got canceled, so they shot a pilot for a reboot of it called Celebrity Matchmates. Celebrity Matchmates got picked up by CBS, but they changed the title to Tattletales. And then a few years ago, HBO did a reboot of it called About Last Night. So every time they bring the show back, they change the title of it. Tattletales, for anyone who's never seen it, it's very simple to explain. It's celebrities playing the newlywed game. They are playing for money, and what they do is they divide the studio audience into 3 sections. Every studio audience has a designated couple, and the studio audience section wins the money that their couple wins.
Yeah, the red, blue, and banana sections.
Red, blue, and the bananas, as Bert Convy dubbed the yellow section. And it's stuck. Every game show needs a good little trademark piece of language, and banana was the piece of language. Tattletales, yeah. And the Tattletales appearances, that's another quirk of Bill's that I learned the first time around when I wrote this book, was Bill really wanted to share his fame with his wife, I think, because he kept trying to get her involved with their shows. He would have Anne appear as a guest panelist on I've Got a Secret. He had her do demonstrations of things on To Tell the Truth. Anne doesn't remember this, but I have a press release that said she occasionally appeared as a model on 3 on a Match. She didn't remember that, but the press release said she. And then they appeared on Tattletales together. And what Anne admitted to me when I was working on this book the first time around was, I was never comfortable in front of the camera the way he was.
Yeah. And
he kind of resisted that. He tried to work around the fact that I was always squeamish in front of the camera. I was always nervous. There was a time that she was a contestant on To Tell the Truth, and she told me this story. She wasn't a contestant on To Tell the Truth. I'll take that back. She was taking gymnastics classes. Her instructor was a contestant on To Tell the Truth, and then Anne was going to do a gymnastics demonstration after the game. So she's in the studio for that.
That's a big demonstration for someone who doesn't like being on camera.
Yeah, and she was feeling really, really flushed, so she took her temperature before she went on stage. She had a temperature of 103. And she said, the point here is I wasn't sick. She didn't have a fever or anything. Her temperature was 103 because she was that nervous about being on camera. Wow. Her body was starting to shut down on her from dread. Bill was always just trying to share his fame with her and, have her along when he was on television. Yeah. Was always uncomfortable in front of the camera, and she said she always kind of marveled at the way the red light would go on the camera and Bill would just come alive, and it was the most natural thing in the world to him, not to her.
Yes. Which you can see that on their Tattletales appearances. Where like
Yeah.
he's just having a great time and she's trying to have a good time, but she's
Yeah,
clearly
she's
removed
reserved.
from this world.
And she even, one of the stories she told me was a Tattletale story about when she attempted to do something that she thought would make the show better, and Bill very gently scolded her after the taping was over. There was a certain question about funeral arrangements, and Anne gave an answer to go for a laugh. She said I had figured Bill had given this answer, and so I thought I'll get a big laugh if I give this answer instead. And so I gave this non-matching answer, and
Mm,
I got my big laugh. But Bill took me backstage. He said Bill was very nice about this. He didn't raise his voice, and he took me someplace where nobody could see us or hear us. But he said, you cost the audience money by doing that. You went for a laugh when you should have been trying to help them win. And she
that is a
said,
fair point.
yeah, and she said that was the first time that it really registered with her what her husband was doing on camera, and it's a really weird thought. You have to be witty and charming and engaging and outgoing, and also play the game well while being witty and charming and engaging and outgoing. And
Yes.
to make the point about this, the next time that you're playing Scrabble or the next time you're playing Monopoly with somebody, try to be funny the entire time that you're playing Scrabble.
Yeah. No.
That's hard to do. You have to play a game well and be funny while playing the game well. That's difficult to do.
That's probably
Um,
why Scrabble doesn't work as a game show, and they've tried.
you know, they've tried. The thing about Scrabble in the 1980s, when it was a hit show, kind of the lesson from that was Scrabble works if it's not really Scrabble. Well, the successful version of the Scrabble game show was we're going to play Hangman. We're going to play Hangman on a Scrabble board, and that's the success of it.
Isn't
So,
that just Wheel of Fortune?
I mean, yeah. So yeah, for everyone who was about to push up the glasses and would say, "Well, wait a minute, Scrabble was a hit show," that kind of goes back to your point, though. No, Scrabble didn't work. The Hangman Scrabble worked. So, yeah.
Right. It's like well, no, Pictionary on TV was actually Pictionary. There was also Win, Lose, and Draw, which is the exact same thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, there are two things at work there. Number one is the success breeds imitation thing, and the
Yes.
second thing that's at work there is a finite number of things that you can do on a game show, because kind of the whole thing about game shows is game shows are designed to only be half listened to, and that
Yes.
goes to the very beginning of television. Remember, game shows were sort of something for housewives to look in on while they were doing housework. So the assumption was everybody who's watching a game show during the daytime is doing something else while it's on.
Yes.
So you've got to keep it fairly simple. You've got to keep it fairly easy to pop in and out of. And so because of that, when you look at game show formats throughout the years, there are only so many things you can do with a deck of cards. There are only so many things you can do with a set of dice.
Yes.
So yeah, there's I don't want to say a finite range of game shows, but you've got to be careful about not going too far afield with ideas.
Right. That's why there's a million reboots and revivals and
Yeah, when I wrote
tweaks.
shows FAQ, I made it a point to ask people who worked in the game show business, what do you think the future of game shows is? And
Mm,
what a bunch of them said was basically the same basic prediction that I got over and over again was there will always be game shows. Game shows will always exist because as long as they're cheap to produce
mm-hmm.
and as they get an audience, as long as those two things are true, there will always be game shows. But
Sure.
what a bunch of people predicted was we are rapidly approaching a point where the decision makers in the television business, are going to step forward and say, okay, we have enough game show ideas. We're done with new ideas. And we're going to get to a point where everything is reboot past idea.
Well, I mean, the wall, for example, like the wall is basically just high stakes plinko.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, that goes back to, um, games like Pachinko, games like
Yes.
carnival games. The
Mm-hmm.
punch board on the right, that's an old carnival game. So yeah, just it seems like every great idea in game shows has been something else in the past.
Yes.
Some of the most successful panel game shows in the history of television. What's My Line? To Tell the Truth, I've Got a Secret. All of them are pretty much variations on 20 questions.
Right.
And
Wasn't
it's a
it
matter
wasn't
of presentation, and it's a matter of packaging.
wasn't it Alan Sherman who came up with I've Got a Secret after seeing
Yeah,
What's My Line, and it's like we better copy it, otherwise someone else is going to.
yeah. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to address in the book was as I learn more and more things, and I'm able to talk to more and more folks who know more than I do. Um, there's kind of an apocryphal story about the creation of I've Got a Secret.
Okay.
And there's the way that Gil Fates, who was a longtime producer at Goodson Time, remembers it. And there's the way that Alan Sherman himself told the story. The story of
Okay.
Gil Fates was that Alan Sherman and his writing partner, Howard Merrill, came into the offices and said, "We have a new idea for a game show."
Yeah.
And they said, "The idea for the game show is we have a contestant who has a secret, and the celebrity panel asks yes or no questions to guess their secret." And
Okay.
Mark Goodson and Bill Todman kind of make faces at them. They said, "We have that. That's What's My Line. And we're not going to do a rip off of our own show." And
Right.
Alan Sherman, according to Gil Fates, Alan Sherman said, "Well, you better rip off your own show because if you don't, somebody else will." And it's true. Again, success breeds imitation. So if nobody else is going to
Yes.
put I've Got a Secret on the if Goodson and Todman were going to do it, some other production company and some other network was going to put I've Got a Secret on the air.
Right.
And you might as well make money off of your own ideas. And so that's the way Gil Fates told the story. And if you look at the remainder of the history of Goodson Timer Productions, you can kind of see this trend where every time they have a hit idea, they immediately launch knockoffs of it.
Yes.
They had a hit with Password, and immediately after Password became a sensation, they introduced a game called Get the Message, which was very similar. They introduced the original match game, and the original match game was a lot closer to Password than what you see on
Yes.
the network and buzzer reruns. Uh, they have a successful show with Family Feud, and then they go on to introduce another game show involving surveys, Card Sharks. So every time they have a hit show,
Yes.
they would move on to, okay, let's knock off the same idea. Let's do a variation. So it would make sense that this story happened.
Yes.
However, Alan Sherman, in his own autobiography, didn't tell that story. And as the aforementioned Matt Ottinger, very wise man, pointed out, Alan Sherman was a lot of things, but we know from the things he wrote, the things he said over the years, that he wasn't modest. And if he got rejected in a meeting and then had just a killer line as a comeback in that meeting and got the show on the air and pulled a sale out of a rejection, a guy with Alan Sherman's ego would tell that story. And if you read his autobiography, that is not the story that he tells at all when he's describing the story of how I've Got a Secret was on the air.
What's
His
his
version of
story?
his was much more straightforward. He suggested this idea to Goodson and Todman, and Goodson just began hammering them with questions about, well, how would we do this? What if we did this? What if this happened? And for some questions, Alan Sherman had a ready answer, and for some
Mm-hmm.
questions, he didn't. And they
Yeah.
nodded their heads. And the thing that his son remembers from hearing his dad tell the story was Mark Goodson cut him a check for $1 as kind of a good faith fee that, okay, if we sell this show, we're going to loop you in. So they paid them $1 for the idea,
Yeah.
and they got the show on CBS. Howard Merrill got a royalty for every episode they aired beyond, while Alan Sherman got a royalty and a job as producer. And so he was the producer of I've Got a Secret
Yeah.
for about 6 or 7 years before getting fired after a series of incidents that led to pretty bad episodes of the show. And that's a thing that's covered in the book. Was
Okay.
Alan Sherman was a lovely, lovely man to people that he didn't work with. If you
Oh
were
no.
if you were a Gil Fates accountant, I believe Gil Fates on this one, he's because you definitely hear about people like this. If you were a person that had to work with Alan, Alan could be a little difficult to talk to, and Alan Alan was inconsistent, which made it very difficult to rely on him as a producer. Alan would have an idea about the direction the show should go,
Mm-hmm.
the direction it should go in, And then weeks later, he would do something that contradicted the direction, and he would say he had this quote from an author: "Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." And yes, there's truth to that, but you kind of your staff can't get into a routine. Your staff can't really get
Right.
into a rhythm of things if you're changing your mind about what the direction of the show should be at every turn. So
Right.
the staff of Good John was getting frustrated with him, and Alan, as Gilface describes it, was an eternal optimist. So Alan Sherman would have these ideas, and everybody would immediately begin waving red flags about here are some things that would go wrong with this idea.
Okay.
And Alan would say, well, let's do it anyway. And the idea would be a disaster.
Oh no.
There was one episode for Easter one year. They did an episode of I've Got a Secret where they had 100 boys from the local boys club in the audience. And
Okay.
Alan's idea was to end the show by releasing 100 rabbits on the stage and saying every boy in the audience tonight gets a free rabbit. So what Alan had in
There
mind,
are there are several clear issues.
now what Alan was imagining, and it was very, very clear when he was pitching this idea, that what Alan pictured was delightful little bunnies scampering all over the stage as cherubic-faced young boys rushed on stage and everybody pranced around to scoop up a rabbit, and it would be a very, very hairy sight. What actually happened, and you see this going on, Gary Moore, the host, announces we have 100 rabbits, and you see like 2 or 3 rabbits come out, and Gilface's memory was the rest of the rabbits would not come out on the stage. They were all huddled in the corner. So one stagehand was getting a push broom and was like trying to shove the rabbits on the stage with a push broom. And said, all right, 100 boys in the audience, each of you gets a free pet rabbit. And these 100 boys stormed the stage immediately. And it's way too chaotic a scene. And Gary Moore, this is live television where you have to fill 30 minutes, but Gary Moore sees these 100 kids run on the stage, and he's immediately like, this can't be salvaged. And Gary Moore just looks at the camera and says, good night, everyone. And they throw it to the secret logo and they sign off early because there's no way to salvage this. Right. Now, they said the miracle here was there was no harm done to the rabbits from 100 kids storming on the stage all at once.
Oh, wow. That is a miracle.
Yeah. What ended up happening was basically the kids, instead of one and that's your rabbit, it became a game of who can get the most rabbits in their arms. So there were kids running around backstage with like 5 or 6 rabbits in their arms trying to gather more and more of them. And they were going into all corners. Like some of the kids had gone into the panelists' dressing rooms to get rabbits out because the rabbits were looking for a way to escape, and they had gone into the dressing room. So yeah, it was this chaotic scene. And thankfully, number one, no animals were harmed. Every rabbit was safe and accounted for when it was all over.
That's
and
good.
Also, even these young boys, 7 or 8 years old, even young boys understood, I can't just go home with a pet rabbit in my arms. Like, that's mom and dad didn't sign off on this. So the boys, when everything quieted down, just walked back and handed the rabbits back to the nearest grown-up and left. So, yeah. Crisis averted, but it was a disastrous segment.
Yes.
And then there was another night where, you book more than you need for taping TV shows now. Like when we do game shows like the ones that I work on, we will tape 5 or 6 episodes in a day, but we'll have 7 or 8 episodes worth of contestants just in case something goes wrong with the contestants that we're supposed to have on the episodes.
Yes.
It's especially important in the era of live television to have more than you need. There was an episode with the guest panelist was Jerry Colada, and they had this night where the panel was just on a roll and they guessed all the secrets right away.
Oh, no.
And it gets to be the 20-minute mark of a 30-minute live broadcast, and they are out of stuff. And
anyone have another secret?
Again, they're talking about, by the way, we mentioned there's this new magazine article out about our panel, and so they're just talking at length about this magazine. And Carl Reiner is on the panel that night, and Gary Moore finally says, Carl, you did this really funny comedy routine one night when I was at a comedy club. Can you do this comedy? And Carl Reiner says, for sure. And so Carl Reiner just does this comedy routine that Gary had described to him as a way to fill the remaining time. But it's this weird moment in live TV where, oh my God, they just ran out of stuff, and it becomes how can
Yes.
we kill 10 minutes? So yeah, Allen eventually got himself fired. Yeah, as I understand it, the straw that broke the camel's back was the night where Tony Curtis was on the show, and in the early going, they had the celebrities actually doing secrets. Here's my secret, and the panel would have to guess it. And
Right.
as the years went by and the show evolved, as shows do, gradually the secrets went away, and the celebrity segment was here's an activity that I'm going to do with the panelists. And it was, instead of playing
Yes.
a secret, it was some kind of activity. And the
And
idea
that's
was
when.
it was going to be Tony Curtis explaining kids games that he had played growing up in New York City
So
to the panel.
stickball.
Yeah, pretty much. But when he got there that day, and Alan Sherman is saying, "All right, here's the games you're going to teach the panel." Tony Curtis had never heard of the games that he was supposed to teach the panel, so the
Oh.
segment ends up being a guy who only learned what this thing was an hour ago, trying to explain it to the panelists who also have never heard of it. And it was just boring enough that that the next day, Mark Goodson said, this isn't working, and fired Alan Sherman. Um, and the weird thing was, Alan Sherman got fired, and immediately the relationship with Goodson Todman got better as a result of being fired by him. Because for the next decade, for pretty much the rest of Alan Sherman's life, he would appear as a guest panelist on Goodson Todman shows.
Yes.
They would book him as a guest star, and it was always very pleasant. It was very warm. Alan was always very entertaining, and they said this was also Gil Fates. Gil Fates said it was kind of a phenomenon that everybody's relationship with Alan Sherman improved. We all got along much better the moment that none of us had to work with him anymore.
Jeez. And for those who are listening and don't know, Bill Cullen was on I've Got a Secret, along
Cullen
with.
was
Yeah.
for 15 years. He was a panelist on I've Got a Secret. It was, and this is a way that the panel shows of the past kind of differ from what's on the show now,
Yeah.
from what you see on game shows now.
I'm sorry, I keep yawning. It's hot here today.
But on a show like Hollywood Squares or a show like Match Game, you see they might have a couple of regulars, but for the most part, it's guest stars sitting on the panel.
Yes.
On particularly on Goodson Todman's game shows, on the panelist. Let me try that again and say it more articulately. On the panel shows in early television, where the point really was that it was a group of people who were good at playing the game, and you were watching the show for
Yes.
the games. Um, you would see the same group of people over and over again, week in and week out. So that was I've Got a Secret. Was
Yes.
they had an occasional guest star when one of the regular panelists was on vacation, like Carl Reiner, who I mentioned earlier, was never a regular on the show.
Right.
But it was Bill, Henry Morgan, Jane Meadows, Faye Emerson, and when Jane Meadows and Faye Emerson left, they were replaced respectively by Betsy Palmer and Bess Meyerson.
Yes.
So it was the same core group of people sitting on the panel for about 15 years. And Bill was there, and everybody kind of had a role on the show. This was
Yes.
the other thing about it wasn't just about playing the game well, but Franklin Heller, who was a director for Goodson Todman for many years, likened it to casting a play. You were looking for four people with distinct personalities who all assumed kind of a role on the show.
Yes.
Henry Morgan was a grouch.
I love Henry Morgan, but yes, he was.
Bess Meyerson was very worldly and very sophisticated. She was an ex-Miss America and very
Yes.
glamorous. Betsy Palmer was very sweet and very naive and would sometimes say somewhat clueless things when she was on the panel. Bill, and this was even Mark Goodson's term for him. Mark Goodson referred to Bill as the utility player.
Yes.
Bill would sort of adapt his personality to whatever the game was in progress. If the other panelists had been getting a lot of laughs and they were having a lot of fun with the segment, Bill would sort of hunker down and be the one who said, all right, enough laughs, let's get some information. And he would ask really serious, detailed, very intricate questions.
Yeah, he was very good at getting information out of people.
And on the other hand, if it had been a quiet, a subdued spot, if there wasn't a lot going on, Bill would reshift the focus and start going for laughs and kind of revive the audience when it's his time. So that Bill changed functions depending on whatever the segment needed, and Bill was a very, very good judge of what the segment needed. This was not an era where anybody had an earpiece in when they were on the air. It was just a matter of Bill having really, really good instincts and really, really good knowledge of what the show called for and what he could do to contribute.
Right.
And that's the television has kind of lost over the years, and some of the game shows have kind of lost was the host was something of an on-air producer.
Yes.
And this was especially something when Bill was hosting The Price is Right, which was created and produced originally by Bob Stewart for Goodson Codman. Um, Bob Stewart figured out very, very quickly that at minimum he would just need to give Bill a hand signal, and Bill could change the entire segment based on the hand signal.
Oh, cool.
Um, Bill was just really good at calling audibles and deciding, okay, we're going to do this instead because he would, whatever the issue was, if he was looking at the clock and saw that the show was dragging on, or if he saw that something that they needed for the next segment of the show wasn't set up or wasn't in the proper place or something was broken, Bill could adapt the segment immediately to salvage the next 5 minutes of The Price is Right.
That's why he's
Uh,
so good at so many different formats.
yeah. There was a show that Bill did for Bob Stewart when Bob Stewart became became an independent producer, I guess. There was an episode where um, the Bob Stewart had one of his sons working as a production assistant, basically, and his son bungled the props that they were using for the bonus round. And the real simple version here is the show accidentally gave away a car in circumstances where the car shouldn't have even been available.
Oh.
And so Bill sees what's happened at the same time as the rest of the audience sees it, and he's explained the rules, and the contestant picks a number from the numbered board, and behind the number the contestant picks is the word car, and the word car isn't supposed to be there. And Bill
Yikes.
just goes into, well, this is the big surprise. We're up to our tricks here. And Bill made it sound like this was a big surprise that the show had planned, and you never know when we might do this. And the staff talking about this years later said, if you watched the show, you would never know that Bill had been caught off guard. You would never know that we had screwed up. Bill made it sound like it was a big surprise that we had been planning for a few weeks.
Okay.
Yeah,
He was that good.
it was great.
But that also, as I'm listening to you talk, explains why he's probably the one game show host where I can watch him in any decade and I don't feel like he's out of his element. Like Gene Rayburn on the original Match Game, it's a little too straight laced for what we know Gene Rayburn to be. And then like Steve Allen, like there gets to be a point where he's just like, are we really making these jokes? This is
Yeah.
juvenile. Like Match Game, he's like, I understand the game. I don't particularly find it amusing. Whereas Bill Cullen would just lean into it like in the it's to tell the truth, where he has to disqualify himself because he met the guy in the bathroom and he had his bird in hand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the great moments. No,
Yes.
and cut to your point, there's a lot of talk in the 2020s about entertainment that hasn't aged gracefully.
Right.
And one of my best friends in the world is a woman named Chelsea Thrasher, who I love reading her observations on Facebook. I love her observations that she posts elsewhere on social media, and I love talking to her about old television because she's so thoughtful and so insightful about old television.
Yeah.
And she said, when you watch old television, game shows included, you see things that make you say to yourself, all right, that hasn't aged
Right.
or things cringeworthy through modern eyes. And one of the things that she observed on social media is you can watch pretty much any old Bill Cullen game show, and it's completely unproblematic.
Yeah.
There's pretty much nothing involving Bill Cullen makes you blink and say, boy, they couldn't do that today. Boy, that doesn't work now.
No.
Everything Bill ever did for the entire 50 years that he was an entertainer, everything aged gracefully, and everything is still very endearing and very comfortable to watch. And
Yes. It may be
yeah,
of its time period, but he changed with the time period, like his hosting style and what he would say. And Alan Ludden did this to a certain extent also.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, both of them were very sort of in tune with the world at large.
Yes.
And there was a thoughtfulness to both of those guys. Gene Rayburn. The thing about Gene Rayburn is I am a fan of Gene Rayburn.
I am too.
I do not begrudge anybody who says they are not, because I promise you, if you say I'm not a fan of Gene Rayburn, I'm not a fan of Match Game, I get it. Gene can
Yes.
be a bit much, and
Yeah.
people who encountered him off camera can see that off camera Gene was a bit much. Um,
Yeah.
Gene is an example of a guy who said things that haven't aged gracefully. Um,
No, which is why even things that made it into the show make it into bloopers.
yeah, and it's Buzzer is very very image conscious and very very careful about the things they air, and there's a slew of episodes of Match Game that Buzzer does not rerun because of things that haven't aged well on the show. Um,
Did Game Show
so
Network in the 90s not have that? Because I grew up watching Match
they
Game.
did not. There are definitely some Match Game episodes that would not. There's an episode from the first year on the air where a contestant matches 3 or 4 celebrities, and her answer was a homophobic slur. So it's not.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not just Gene. It really is. Here's the era we were living.
And I
Um,
think that's why I don't have an issue with Match Game because, like, this is the 70s. This is
well, that's
women's lib. This
I get
everyone's super open about. Like, this is also the time period people would watch pornography in theaters with their closest friends. Like, it's the era.
you know I did I was one of the talking head interviewees for the Game Show, ABC's 4-part documentary series about game show history that they did
It
a
used
couple
to
of
be on
years.
Hulu. I'm not sure if it's still on Hulu.
And one of the things that ended up on the cutting room floor that I remember discussing with the interviewer was they were going to cover, they were going to have a segment that they ended up not doing about how game shows of the past haven't aged gracefully.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said at the time, and this is still kind of my stance, is you have to remember that game shows are not scripted in the sense of a traditional
No.
TV show. Game
No.
shows have game shows have real people as the contestants, and the celebrity panelists are out there
Yes.
flying. And I said, because of that, you are seeing and you are hearing interactions and language and behavior that are basically how people acted. And I said, the
Mm-hmm.
plain, as uncomfortable as this is when you watch an old game show and you see something that hasn't aged gracefully, what you are seeing is a reflection of the reality back then. So when a
Yes.
contestant says a homophobic slur and matches 4 celebrities, the reason that happened is because that's 1973, and that is something that people were comfortable saying back then. And
Yes.
yeah, and saying in a situation where they weren't scripted or monitored.
Right. Whereas now, well, actually, if it's early on, Charles Nelson Riley would not be on the panel. But now, like, if I'm watching the episode, I might be like, guys, Charles is right there.
Yeah. So that's the thing of it. That's the reality of it is, okay, stuff didn't age gracefully, but it's a game show, which means these are real people. So the problem is that was reality at that time.
Right. I don't think you can say that the game shows are like problematic or age gracefully without having to first give the audience a history lesson, which does
Right.
not work in prime time.
Yeah. And that's the difficulty with old television. Now we can go into an argument then about should these shows be taken out of reruns? Should these shows be taken out of circulation?
Right.
Uh, because, for example, one of the famous examples of dealing with stuff is when Warner Brothers first began releasing their old cartoons on DVD. I think it was Warner Brothers that did this.
Yes, wasn't it like the Forbidden 11 or something like that?
Censored 11, but not just the Censored 11, but I mean, they did just a whole box set of Looney Tunes cartoons. And
Yeah.
it came with a disclaimer saying, you know, what you're going to see in some of these cartoons was wrong then and it's wrong now. But the phrasing of it was, we are leaving these things in the cartoons because to remove them would be to pretend that they didn't exist.
That is true.
Uh,
Like Disney
and
tries to do with Zippity Doodah. I mean,
and
not the Song of the South, not Zippity Doodah. The song's apparently fine. The movie is not
right, and
in
pop
Disney
culture,
World.
to some degree, all popular culture is a reflection of reality.
Yes.
And this stuff makes you cringe, but the thing is, That's what people were fine with at the time. That's what people were entertained by at the time. And, it's this is not a matter of people are more easily offended now. What has happened in the era of social media, partly, is marginalized groups have more of a voice now than they did.
Yes.
It would be very, very difficult for a group of people in the 1940s to organize and say, we are not okay with what we saw in this cartoon. But
Yes.
because of the instant feedback that we're capable of in this era, people are able to use their voice and say, no, 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 we're really not okay with this.
Right.
Um, and, there are occasional, I think there are occasional surprises on both sides of the fence. Yeah.
Um, then I mean, there's so much to talk about. I was Before we met, I was watching the Bill Cullen clip of him on The Price is Right with Bob Barker,
Oh, yeah.
where everyone who watches it is like, "Wait, they don't mention he's the original host, but he is
Yeah.
promoting Child's Play."
Yeah, he's there to promote a show, so I get it, but also it is a peculiar thing.
Yes.
Yeah, Bill Cullen made an appearance on The Price is Right, hosted by Bob Barker, exactly once in
Yes.
1982, and it was a segment to promote the new game show Child's Play that Bill was hosting. Uh,
Yes.
and at no point during the segment did they mention that Bill hosted The Price is Right for 9 years. They go right past that.
And the audience would have known that too.
Oh yeah, because I mean, there hadn't been enough of a generational change. There were plenty of people in that audience that would have remembered Bill hosting the show at
Yeah.
that point. So it was a strange choice on their part. Um, they had an interaction when they were both on Tattletales, though. Bill and Bob and their respective wives were on Tattletales one week together, and
Mhm.
they actually they opened the show by acknowledging we have two hosts of The Price is Right here, and Bill mentioned this is the first time we've actually met. So the
Right.
first time that he and Bob Barker ever stood face to face, it was an episode of Tattletales.
That is such a weird fact.
Yeah, I collect those. I collect weird facts.
That is why we get along. But what I was trying to get at was Child's Play, which I remember watching on Game Show Network. And I probably wasn't much older than the kids trying to define these things.
Yeah,
And now I'm looking back on it and I'm like, okay, like, this is actually kind of adorable.
yeah. No, I have a friend who actually auditioned to be on the show and got rejected. He wanted to be he was auditioning to be one of the kids, and
Okay.
his story was he brain cramped on one of the words they gave him to define in his audition, and it
Oh
uh,
no.
how do I remember this? The word was suspenders, and he said something like, "Well, that's the person who suspends you from school," or something. It was a completely unusable definition in every way. So they,
But it's a good one.
uh,
So,
so how you doing?
I- I'm I'm good. I'm just trying to see, is there anything else Bill Cullen related? We've kind of weaved throughout the whole game
Yeah,
show universe
uh,
at that time.
yeah, game show universe. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book, and again, this goes back to finding more examples of it as I was researching the second edition, was Bill had this weird habit over and over again of crossing paths with people who were about to become famous, and so it's collect those stories. He had a side gig very very early in his broadcasting career, introducing singers at concerts in the New York, New Jersey area.
Okay.
He would introduce Frank Sinatra before anybody knew who Frank Sinatra was. Frank Sinatra was just the featured singer who was performing with the band tonight, and Bill was introducing him. And then at the very, very end of Bill's career, he was a guest on $25,000 Pyramid. And one of his contestant partners for the week that he was guest panelist was Paul Feig, who went on to create
Right.
Freaks and Geeks, has gone on to direct and write a whole bunch of television film.
Right.
So Bill just kept crossing paths with people who were on the cusp of stardom, and it was almost like Bill was a lucky charm for these people, that they kept bumping into him on their way up.
That is Just wow, that's crazy. Though I mean, looking back, there are quite a few people who originally appeared on game shows who then would become known for other things, or like Vanna White, Price is Right, and then would become Vanna White of Wheel of Fortune fame.
Oh yeah.
And then Kirstie
Uh,
Alley on Password and Match Game. It was Match
oh yeah.
Game, wasn't it?
Yeah, she was a contestant on MASH Game. She was an interior designer from Wichita, Kansas. Was the way she was introduced.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's kind of a fun thing about game shows in general is, and
Yeah.
it's very understandable how this happens. Is you come out to Hollywood to chase a dream. It
Yes.
takes money to chase your dreams. You have no money, so you need to make a lot of money quick. And game shows give you a chance to win $10,000 or more in a single day. And so because of that, there's just there's just a grocery list of celebrities who were contestants on game shows at the moment they came off the turnip truth.
Yes.
And so it's fun to go back through old game shows and see who was who at the very beginning of their careers.
Yes. And are there any other Bill Cullen game shows you want to mention? Because I know we did not mention all of them. There are also parts of the website, like his airline.
Yeah, that was all the more reason to buy the book. Is yes, Bill kind of took up owning an airline. There's kind of some question about how involved he was with this airline. He may have just put up the money for capital to support it. But when he would give interviews, he indicated that he was really, really involved at a level of actually piloting some of the flights himself to try to keep the business afloat. Um,
Okay.
Bill had a company called Appointment Airlines, and it was what Bill called an air taxi service. And the idea was you could book a flight to a place that was not exactly your destination, and then Bill's airline would take you to the place that you actually wanted to go. So if you were looking to go to a
Okay.
small town in New Jersey, you could book a flight to New York City, and then Bill's airline would take you from New York City to the tiny, tiny town in New Jersey where you actually intended to travel. So that was
Okay.
Appointment. And so Bill owned this airline for a few years and could never get it off the ground. And in interviews, he would give a couple of stories that I would call apocryphal stories
Okay.
about adventures he had gone on piloting flights. I can believe that Bill would be the person to take the initiative and said, yes, I will pilot this flight because we are desperately underfunded and we're trying to keep this business above water. But also, it's at a time when Bill was doing a slew of live radio and television shows every
Right.
week. And how many hours are there in a day? So there's a chance that some of the stories that he told to the press were stories of things that he knew happened to employees that were working for the company. Or they actually did happen to Bill, and he just actually did manage to find the time of the day to get at these little adventures that he told about piloting airplanes in his downtime.
I mean, if they were
Um,
local,
yeah,
I mean,
but
like
I
if
mean
you have
that's
3 hours to fly someone.
why. I mean, why not do it? So that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's. I don't know how true his stories are, but they're certainly feasible. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the curious things from Bill's career was he decided he would try to be an airline mogul, and it didn't take off the way that he was trying to do.
Oh, and we also did not mention the Bill Cullen Mel Brooks story.
The, that has become Mel Brooks told that story, I think to GQ. I think that's where that story first came from.
Yeah.
And it became such a popular story that in subsequent interviews, he's asked, "Tell this story again, Uncle Mel." And so he's told this story in like 4 or 5 different forums. Um, for anyone who is not aware, Bill Cullen actually was disabled. He was
Yes.
stricken by polio as an infant.
Mm,
He mostly recovered from the polio, but the muscles in one of his legs atrophied, which meant his legs grew to 2 different lengths. And so he had kind of an odd walk. He had a bit of a limp. The severity of it, I found over the years, the severity of it is somewhat exaggerated. The best way to describe the way he walked was when Bill walked, if you didn't know better, you would think his foot was asleep. That's what it looked like when Bill walked.
okay. Well, you
And
can
so
catch glimpses of it on some
you can't.
shows.
This is the thing. Bill was not self-conscious about the limp. The shows that he worked on would accommodate him by avoiding showing him walking as much as they could. They would cut to other shots of the stage, or they would cut to other other
Right,
people
like
on stage.
Password would usually show people walking, but when Bill was on, it's like, we're going to commercial, and then now they're sitting at Alphabetics.
But also, Bill would not. You would never see Bill like glance at a monitor or wait for a cue for somebody to get up and walk. He would just get up and walk whenever he
Yeah.
can get some. So occasionally on his game shows, you will see him move.
Yeah,
For
it's
just
not a secret.
so Bill was disabled, but because Bill wanted to downplay it, and because the shows he worked on would cut away from these shots, there were a lot of people in the general public who truly did not know that he was disabled. And Mel Brooks was one of the people that didn't know that Bill Cullen was disabled.
Yeah.
So Mel Brooks is a guest star on I Guess when they're doing a celebrity week. And Bill got up at one point during a taping break and walked out to the audience to say hi to the audience. And Mel sees the way Bill is walking and just assumes, oh, Bill is doing a funny walk to get a laugh. I'll do a funny walk too. So Mel gets up and follows Bill to the audience, and he's doing this really exaggerated flip-flop feet walk to get a laugh from the audience. And meanwhile, the other celebrity who's on the stage that day is yelling, Mel, what are you doing? Stop it. It's polio. And the audience laughing, and Mel hears the other celebrity say this, and it's registering with him, oh my God, I'm making fun of a disabled person in front of this audience. And the studio audience is laughing, and Bill turns around and sees what he's doing. And Bill lets out a laugh, and he leans into Mel and he said, you know what? You're the only person who's ever had the nerve to make fun of my crippled walk. He says, I always feel really, really bad about it because everyone is so careful not to say anything or do anything about me. And so Bill interpreted Mel's joke a completely different way. So just in this instant, you have Mel mortified because he was making fun of a disabled guy and didn't realize he was disabled. And in turn, the disabled guy is actually appreciative of Mel making fun of him because he's been going through life watching people be very, very careful around him.
Yes.
And here's the guy who's not being careful around him. So Bill interpreted the joke a completely different way and appreciated it.
Right. Which I also love, like, it's Mel Brooks, and everyone's like, tell the Bill Cullen story again.
And I love that too because Bill was a television star in an era and in a forum where people didn't get remembered.
Right.
Especially daytime game shows aired and were promptly forgotten in that era. So just anything
if
that
they
keeps
weren't wiped,
yeah. And anything that keeps a name from the past out there, I'm in favor of. That's why I loved it. Carl Reiner late in life was on Conan and told a story about Alan Ludden, and that made my night because, well, first of all, I was going to sell some extra books because he told that story, but also it just the fact that it keeps the name out there. I love that. Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to cover for a 1 hour and 5 minute interview. Everything else, you'll just have to spend some money at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, with thrift books to see everything else I want to say about Bill Cullen.
Yeah. How long is the book? Just out of curiosity.
Oh my God, it just goes on forever. It's
you don't want to put it that way. You want to phrase it like there's a lot of detail and you'll learn a lot.
I got the biggest kick out of it when my copies arrived in the mail because it's so heavy. I was like, oh my God, you can use the hardcover version as a weapon. I would advise women everywhere to carry one of these in their purse. But yeah, the book is 755 pages.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes, and not only 755 pages, but look at the way this thing is lined up. This thing comes with both a front and a back cover to keep those pages together.
A front and a back cover?
Comes with the front and the spine.
Right.
And those things are on the book to keep the pages from falling apart, which is a very common problem for books that don't have front, back covers or spines.
Right.
So this is for your convenience. It has a cover on it.
Cool.
But yeah, 755 pages of everything you would ever want to know about Bill Cullen. It's on sale right now. Like I said, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, thrift books, or directly from the publisher at Bear Manor Media.
Okay. I don't know why you were sounding like a robot, but get the Bill Cullen book. The second edition is available, like Adam said, Bear Manor Media. The website is the website of the publisher, Amazon, thrift books. Is it pretty much anywhere books are sold, or?
I would say those are your four best resources for it. I'm not going to
Okay.
say anywhere where books were sold.
That is true.
I've not monitored every bookstore to see it, if that's possible.
Okay, so you have not personally surveyed every bookstore in America. Good to know.
No, but definitely those 4 sources. So check those out. Yes.
Okay, and thank you, Adam, for joining joining us on Greetings from the Idiot Box.
Thank you.
And until next time, this is Allison Lips for Greetings from the Idiot Box. Remember, television is a medium neither rare nor well done. Bye.